All right, so this episode is number 4.
Okay.
Cerebral Zone. We got Glenda from Cannavision Laboratories, Brett from Loomis Automation,
Hello.
Cerebral Zone host. I do want to give a quick disclaimer before we begin this episode. So this podcast episode is intended for educational purposes only. We do not endorse the use of cannabis or any related products. The content provided is informational and should not be considered professional or medical advice. Cannabis laws vary by jurisdiction and may change, so listeners should research and verify local regulations. Any actions taken based on this episode are at the listener's discretion. By listening, you agree to hold us harmless from any claims arising from the information provided. Thank you for joining us. All right.
Okay.
So really we're here to interview Glenda, and I personally have questions about your company, Cannavision Laboratories. Why don't we get started with, introducing yourself.
Okay.
And tell us about Cannavision Laboratories.
Yeah. Okay. I am Glenda. I am CEO and co-founder of Cannavision Labs. Cannavision Labs is a manufacturing company, so we make all the concentrates, everything ranging from BHOs, which are butane hash oils, all the way to like a vapable product. That's kind of us in a nutshell.
Nice.
Yeah.
How long have you been in business?
I've been in the industry we've been in the industry as Cannavision for about 7 years, and we have our own manufacturing company for about 3 years of that. Yeah. So we were in partnerships with other companies before, and then, we branched out on our own. Yeah.
So for people that are listening, you mentioned you produce like cannabis products or provide services, right? So can you describe a little bit in detail for people that don't know, like what does it entail to do like hash oils? Like what is that?
Yeah. So we take biomass. So just, it could be the trim, it could be flour, fresh, frozen, cured. There's a variety of ways that the biomass comes in, but we essentially take the raw material, put it through an extraction process using hydrocarbon solvents, primarily butane and propane, a mixture of, and then we extract them in a closed loop system. Once it's extracted, we refine the process to create different textures and consistencies. Most of the time it's done mechanically, like we whip it or introduce air, or we let it crash with heat. It's just to get a different type of consistency. But essentially, once it's extracted from the plant matter, it's cannabis oil, so people like different consistencies, they have different preferences, and who are we to say what's better? We just do it all. Yeah. So it goes from that state into a raw cannabis oil type situation. Once it hits the final state, we do a lot of bulk sales, or we take it one step further and make a vapable product, which is just decarbing it so that it can actually go into a product that is a direct use. So once you buy it, you can use it right away.
I did want to say to people that are listening, we are in California.
Yes.
So it's legal out here. I don't know how long it's been legal now, but
like 7 years.
7 years.
Yeah,
7
something
years.
like that.
Quite a while.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I know a lot of states it's not legal yet, and I'm not sure where they're at with that. But for anyone that needs services like that, Cannavision Laboratories is in Orange County, California.
Yes.
So,
that's true. Cannabis isn't like legal across the nation, but there are a lot more states that are adopting the medicinal use. So we are seeing a lot of states coming online now, at least for the medicinal purpose. And I don't know, I think it's like a hop, skip, and a jump away from actually being a national recreational country, honestly.
Yeah. I mean, does anyone know how many states are either rec or medical versus completely illegal?
Don't know off the top of my head, but I could say probably more are than are not.
Yeah. I'd say there's probably only, 5 to 10 that are fully illegal.
I think so, something like
So
that.
at least 80%
Yes.
have one or the other.
So I just looked it up. 23 states have legalized
Well, I think that's recreational.
recreational. Yes.
Yeah.
Look up medical. Legalized medical weed. 38.
38 states.
Okay, so not quite as many.
Yeah.
But what's that?
I mean, that's a
I guess
good
yeah,
majority
12,
that
so
is, yeah.
12 are not.
Mm-hmm. It's definitely trending that way into like acceptance. It was so taboo for so long, but cannabis has just a wide variety of applications and uses for people. You know, a lot of anecdotal information available because it wasn't like a, you know, as a classified substance, so nobody could study it. But now it's definitely opening up the doors for a lot of research and clinical trials. So more to come on that, and especially like isolated cannabinoids. There is, again, certain applications for isolated cannabinoids that haven't really been studied but have had anecdotal evidence to support some clinical research. So it's going to be exciting for, you know, certain ailments, but we can't really, I mean, until we know, right? It's all kind of just ideas.
Yep.
Yeah. I want to go back a little bit in time. Like, how did you even get into this? Right?
Yeah.
How did it even? Oh yeah, I'm gonna start a cannabis company. Like,
No,
how did that
definitely
even come?
not like that.
Yeah, how did that come out?
No. So I have a younger brother who is the COO and also co-founder, and he is 7 years younger, so he was a little bit more adventurous than I was, and probably allowed to do so more because, you know, as you get younger, parents start to care less about what you do. So he got away with a lot of things, and he started off delivering, or he got introduced after high school, and he started consuming, using it to treat some of his kind of anxieties or whatnot, and he found it very beneficial. Then when he worked in the industry, he saw that it was lucrative. Obviously, when it first became not fully recreational, but when it was in the medicinal state in California, it was still a very lucrative industry. Not that it's not now, but it's definitely changed. So he was intrigued by both the medicinal aspect and then the money aspect. And he asked me for help. At that point, I was graduating with a degree in chemistry from UCI, and I had I had graduated with my sister, who was a year younger, and I felt like I had given her like some guidance, or at least whatever she needed, and supported her in her academic endeavors. And then, there's my younger brother who felt like he might have been a little lost, looking at this new industry, actually sounding more like a potential entrepreneur as opposed to just a consumer. And so it was very inspiring to me to see him become very interested. It wasn't just a fleeting thought. It was, it started off with approaching the conversation, because I grew up in the DARE era. Right. Drugs were just no, and I stayed away from them and did the whole thing. I was afraid, couldn't, be around it. And so when he approached it, I thought at first, oh, he's just joking. It's not going to be anything serious. And then he became more and more, serious. I listened to what he was saying. I definitely thought, oh, maybe there could be something. And I figured, since I helped my sister, or I thought I did, that I would do the same for him, and that I would diverge my educational career for 2 years to help him. And here we are 7 years later, and a full manufacturing company after, and we're still chugging along. Yeah. So it was that we saw an opportunity as well during the early medicinal stage, when a lot of the operators came from like the legacy market, not a lot of science backed kind of information. I saw that niche of being able to come in and bring like a scientific approach to like an emerging industry. And so that coupled with, just family ties, that's how I got in.
I hear it's difficult to get the license.
It is quite difficult. The licensing process, it's more difficult now as provisional license have become a thing of the past in California. It was extremely difficult to find a location. There are areas in the industry called green zones, or in different cities called green zones, where cannabis production is allowed. And it also has to do with just the jurisdiction. So different cities have different rules and different tax laws and, all sorts of fun things to navigate. So there wasn't a whole lot of area where we can kind of come in for a non-legacy price point. Let's just say that, right? Is there was people who were coming in from, not the medicinal side, even further back in time when, things were a little bit more murky, and they had a lot of money to invest, which was why they called it the green rush. People really did. They had millions of dollars to kind of throw at it, and that wasn't like what we did. It wasn't what we had intended for investment. It was just a family business funded reluctantly by our mother. But she believed in the goal, and so she did it. So our funds were limited to that one investor, and so we looked at different cities for a long time, like the high desert. Those were areas where the cities were interested in bringing in tax revenue from cannabis. So they were more lenient, and they were insistent on bringing people in and accepting and applications. So that's where we started our journey. It sounded too good to be true, and it was, because our project out in Desert Hot Springs never actually completed the build. The infrastructure wasn't there. It is the desert, so there's no water, electricity, infrastructure. It's a pain. And so though we thought, we found the best spot, kind of the best bang for your buck, if you will, it never actually came to fruition. Nothing actually, even to this day, there has not been anything built on the site of a project called Coachillin, which is where we were supposed to be operating. Yeah. And so because of that, through that kind of entrance, we found other people that helped, that kind of guided us into different areas and different cities. It wasn't, all it was cracked up to be. We definitely encountered some of the negative sides of cannabis early on that could have really eliminated us from the industry. But by the grace of our attorney, who will forever have a perfect little spot in my heart, she killed it and got us situated. But yeah, we went from Desert Hot Springs to LA, to really being kind of stranded without a home, to where we are now in Santa Ana, which honestly has been a great partnership with the city. It wasn't easy. It also was in the smack dab middle of COVID. So, it just piled on.
Yeah, you just like a challenge, right?
Yeah. Yes. But, with adversity, you either make it or you don't. And I guess it helped kind of solidify our stance and what we want to do, and kind of the position that we have to show, and all, the responsibility of really making it, not just for the sake of what we've done and our investor or whatever we want as a family, but, not a lot of people like us make it, and there are very few and far in between. So that helped with the idea that we had to, but yeah, that's kind of more or less, maybe a little more than less.
Well, so you touched on something real quick that I wanted to ask, and it's about the different laws and learning them, and going? Like you said, you looked in the high desert first, and
Yeah.
then kind of all over Southern California.
Mhm.
And I got to imagine the laws are pretty consistent town to town, but there are still some subtle differences, I'm sure.
Yes.
You mentioned your lawyer helped you out, but
Yeah.
was that kind of your main source of like figuring
Honestly,
out
we
how
went
it worked?
in it very naively. We went to again, we looked kind of like for the best bang for your buck. So we knew that cities like Santa Ana were a little out of our price range to begin with because we didn't have this legacy money coming in behind us. And the desert was like the most cost effective. Our broker or our investor is also a real estate broker, our mom, and she, used her resources to kind of look for the best square footage price point. And then that's how we started out of the desert. And that was kind of the jump off point because we wanted to be local, right? The desert from OC is like 2 hours away in like good traffic, and so almost 3 in bad traffic. As a daily commute, that sounds awful. So we wanted to stay local, but we realized we might not be able to. And that's kind of where the jump off point is. From there, we were our own kind of business developers. So we did a lot of interacting with the city, interfacing with them directly, as well as the group that we were going to partner with, I suppose. They had a lot of pull with the city as well. It was another big group of real estate associates, brokers, and they kind of had their firm of architects, engineers who were doing this master plan. It was a huge undertaking. Coachella as a project was I say, I don't know if it's actually dead, but I haven't seen anything. But they had this plan for what they would call like the Disneyland of cannabis. It was going to be a destination spot in the desert. I don't know how. Nobody wants to go to the desert unless it's Palm Springs or Coachella, right?
Right.
But it was supposed to be this huge thing. So they did have a lot of people that were kind of navigating those jurisdictions there. So we interfaced with the city for like submitting our permits and stuff like that. We never got to a point where we really needed to go in depth. And then when we left the desert and we're out in LA, we came in as kind of, in our partnership, we were just the manufacturing force. So we didn't do the licensing. We kind of left it to our partners, which again goes back to why we did our own standalone kind of business. Because when you have to trust people to do things that require, a lot of finessing, I would say, you put yourself in a lot of risk. And we definitely I think we put ourselves in a risky situation. That is why I say our attorney helped us, because we hired her after we were in LA, just honestly on a whim, I think. We saw her speak at a dispensary that was formerly called Bud and Bloom, and she was just like amazing, like a firecracker. She just knew. That's what it felt like. And my brother and I, we went to go see it, to go see her speak and kind of be introduced to her knowledge. And we saw her. We were just hooked. We chatted and got her card and made an appointment. She had like 2 months out before she was ever going to see anybody to like take new clients. And so we made that appointment there, knowing that we were about to sign a contract in LA. And we were like, okay, we just hope this works out. And luckily it did, because we retained her shortly after, and the situation in LA fell apart also shortly after. Yes. But no, to I guess to really identify, I have no idea any other jurisdictions any longer besides Santa Ana. Once we decided to go there, though our attorney is great and very expensive and highly worth what she her daily or her hourly rate, it was just not something that was completely feasible to us. So she helped us do a majority of the work and then guided us in certain aspects of that.
Gotcha.
So it became our job to really know the regulations, know what we're getting ourselves into, and talk to everyone, city planners, the the fire inspectors, everything of everything. Yeah. So.
Wow.
Yeah, very hands-on. Not ideal, but also you learn the best that way, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we've been to your facility and
Yes.
I've seen like, I mean, we're inside a building, but there's like little rooms. I mean, is that all that stuff, all that equipment was part of the investment that you guys put into it? Like you guys built all that?
The build out was limited to kind of what we installed for our explosion proof area. So all the basically walk-in hoods that have some call outs for explosion proof electrical components, that we built that out. And then like kind of the shell of the building was already in place, like the offices. We only built out one room, which is a secured storage, to keep it cold and to keep it isolated from the rest of the building. But everything like that was laid out by one, I guess maybe he's an engineering firm that we hired to do the layout of the building and to be to code, right? Because I mean, it's one thing to kind of know what you're getting into, and then it's another thing to know fire codes, building codes, and all of that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
No, I limited myself to that. I'm sure had we been even more limited in funds, I would have had to learn all of that. But luckily, we could get that plan laid out. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I'm not too familiar with the processes in the past. Like, I don't know how people used to do it before it was legal. I do see you have equipment, and we work with different equipment. I guess how does innovation play in a role in the cannabis industry? Like, how does that?
Yeah, a lot of innovation, or I want to call it like street innovation, happened, during the time that it wasn't even legal medicinally. There was, one scientist in like the 60s or 70s, the father of cannabis. He wrote, I think, like Cannabis Alchemy. He did the first research before it became a classified substance. And he wrote a book. He did the first kind of distillation and kind of rudimentary art, like setup for everything that's known. So, when it became like a federal crime and, just cannabis was eliminated from the street, right? From like at least what was visible. People sought to, some knowledge from there as a foundation. I think he had outlined some of the solvents that could extract. And then, people started selling flour. Flour is very bulky to move around. And also it can get old and,
moldy, right?
And moldy. And I mean, we don't ever extract molded products, but definitely when it wasn't so, and it's still, the regulations are still, I want to say in the infancy, nothing is standardized. So it's difficult to really say that everybody runs a certain way. There are guidelines, but it's just a guideline. It's not an actual operating procedure, a standard operating procedure. So these people kind of drew inspiration from what was there and the fact that they had product that was either damaged or too bulky to transport, and created a concentrated product. And and though now, like in the industry, for a volatile type extraction, a closed loop system is kind of the standard. Before it evolved into what it is now, it was actually something called open blasting, where people, got a cylinder, filled it with flour, and then just pushed butane through it and collected it at the bottom in a little container.
Interesting.
Yeah, a very dangerous and scary process. I hear it's still like a thing people do. I would not recommend it. It is extremely dangerous. You're putting a volatile gas into the environment. You don't know what can spark it and blow up, but that is where it evolved.
I think I remember my college friends doing that.
Open blasting?
Yeah, they had like some butane and they were like, I don't know.
Yeah.
It was like a massive thing. It was just like a hand
Yeah,
thing, and
it
they were
was-
like
it's a
I'm
plastic.
hand-
sure they
Yeah.
had all their permits and everything.
Yeah,
Right?
I know.
If anyone,
Back in
Well,
college
anyone's
days.
asking.
Yeah, and
many years ago.
yeah, I just remember seeing it, and I think they were like oil
Yeah.
would come out, and
Mhm.
they would just put it like on a piece of paper, and
It
Yeah.
comes out in the butane solution. So butane is a solvent. It essentially strips all the THC off the plant. So it's open. It's an open blast because it's a cylinder that you can pack the cannabis in, and it has like a little hole. And then those butane containers that you like refill your lighter with, that's what you use. So you take the top off and you just insert it. And so the butane that's compressed in this canister is now liquid form at ambient temperature. It becomes volatile, so it starts to become a gas. But before it gets to that, right, the immediate like touching of the flower, it pulls all the cannabis off with the butane. So then you collect it on a little tray and you let it sit at room temperature because it's a volatile gas. So at room temperature, it starts to boil off. And so you leave it there long enough and you remove, let's say all of it, because I would hope that people left it for a long time before they used it. That, you remove at least what's a fair amount of butane and you're left with primarily THC. Yeah. Or like a mixture of cannabinoids.
a lot of my friends should have been engineers. I know I remember seeing them in college doing some
Yeah.
crazy things like that.
Yeah.
And then I remember going into a room where they had like literally like an engineering project of growing flower.
Oh, yeah.
And it was, they had pumps, everything was like automated, lighting, and I'm like, they should have been engineers.
Well,
Yeah, they were already doing
or
it.
horticulturists.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
They ended up being like construction people, but I was
Those
impressed.
people make a lot of money too.
Yeah, I was impressed. I mean, you mentioned the butane and the chemicals and all that. Are you guys, I mean, you work in extraction, like, are you guys concerned of any of these chemicals just getting into product and affecting people's health? Like, do you guys...
Yeah, I know a lot of people, there's a stigma around this idea of solvent versus solventless, which is kind of a running joke in our facility because a very popular type of concentrate right now is something called a rosin, which is extracted with water. And water is the universal solvent. It's not just a solvent. It's the universal solvent. You can dissolve everything, almost anything in water. And so, but rosin is advertised as a solventless extraction. You know what I mean? So it's kind of silly to think about it that way. Are people worried about smoking any residual water in rosin? No, right? Because it's dry by the time you get it. It's the same thing with a hydrocarbon extraction. Excuse me. The hydrocarbon extraction happens in the closed loop system. And so though we use maybe like a 5-to-1 to actually extract THC, by the time it becomes a consumer product, there is very minimal THC left. Or, I'm sorry, butane left. It's desiccated for at least 48 hours.
But yeah, I mean, that's, for me, it was just one of those concerns because I see processes and chemicals, and I don't know if people are, I know some of my friends prefer to like smoke flower, for example, than distillate.
I think everything that's consumed via a smokable good or a vapable product has, some downfalls. Smoking in general is a carcinogen. I mean, like, you know what I mean? Like, I hate to go that route, but if somebody's really worried, if you were to ever light up any butane, you would kind of see an explosion, right? So if you ever light up your dab and it kind of goes up in flames, and yeah, it had way too much butane or it had butane left, but everything that we do is third-party tested. So there are some requirements that are set up by the Department of Cannabis Control, which is the jurisdiction in California. The body, that kind of comes in and sets limits, does a thing. So it's all third-party tested. There are limits of solvents, but just to kind of give for instance, every state that is legal has different like solvent requirements. And
Gotcha.
then California, we're the most stringent. So, like those are the lower limits of any kind of solvent residuals that you'll see. But even then, done correctly, it's very close to non-detect in what you get as a final product. So solvents or anything additionally used are treated, as a recovered kind of process. It wouldn't just be left in, and we definitely don't have any instances where extra solvent is left in the product. That would be kind of insane, I think. But yeah, it definitely has always been a topic of conversation for people who argue versus, flour versus a concentrate versus a vapable product and so forth and so on. But I think a lot of it, like I said, is some of it is a lack of education, but also, a preference. This helps me feel safe to use a product as opposed to what it really is.
Yeah. And so even though, it's the FDA is not involved yet, and there are different laws state to state or even city to city, what you're saying is you still get a third party tested to make sure it's safe. And you said something that California is the most stringent of all the states. So maybe it's even fair to say California's product is, I don't say better than other states, but
I would say better.
certainly held to higher standards.
Definitely. I mean, a lot of cannabis culture originated in California, right? All of the rap songs and, cannabis is like a California culture. And so it would only make sense to have all these stringent laws and kind of like a regional approach to cannabis and really help us create the best product so that when it does become like a national acceptance, people can identify the cannabis that comes here just because it'll have that, not just provenance, but also, just a better quality. Yeah. Definitely.
Nice. I hear this term sativa and indica. Like, can you tell us what the differences are? Like, is that just
like for real, or
yeah,
what
for real. Like, is that a thing?
No
like,
difference.
yeah. What is
Maybe,
it?
could you just start off real quick with what the stereotype is, like for 30 seconds, and then
Okay.
and then
Sativas are typically like, and you know what? I'll probably get them inverse because I don't even really know what people think. But I think sativa is the stuff that gets you like drowsy and sleepy, and you get like a body high. Is it the inverse? Indicas are. Okay. See, I always get them confused because they really mean nothing in terms of like their effects. There is some correlation to like terpenes associated, but there is also crossover between the terpenes in sativas and indicas. So this idea of a sativa versus an indica is kind of like a historical relic,
Yeah.
kind of like a vestigial limb that just is there.
Isn't it more concentration of THC and CBD in the plant? Like, isn't one more?
There isn't like there's no evidence to suggest that.
So
There's
it's just
actually there was a recent study. I don't remember the title, but there was a recent study that kind of tried to cluster whether it was cannabinoids or terpenes associated with each. And like I said, there's a crossover between both. A plant is so like uniquely different even when you clone it. Environmental factors affect them, and so forth and so on, whether they fix nitrogen correctly and can grow, and it's an organism that you can't really manufacture perfectly each time. That's why concentrates are kind of like the best of both worlds. You can create a reproducible product, but in the terms of plants, like you can't. And so this idea of sativa versus indica is really to me an idea of the entourage effect that you get with certain cannabinoids and terpenes. But even then, certain terpenes that most people associate with being awake and stuff like that are also found in the indicas of the world that are sedative. So I don't know, it's I can't take it away because a lot of people are super adamant about this, being what they do. And that's great, like if that's how you feel, and it may have some, some kind of effect, but a lot of it I think has to do with just how people feel. And, kind of a placebo, but definitely, certain terpenes and certain combinations can have certain effects, but it also is very anecdotal and subjective to people's metabolisms and so forth.
Yeah, I think I heard someone talking once about like way back when, 30, 40 plus years ago, there was actual difference and noticeable difference. And I want to say indicas were more grown in colder regions and higher altitudes. It's like Peru or like maybe Northern California.
Right.
Where the sativas originated in like tropical areas that were hot and humid, and
Like Central Coast-ish.
Yeah, so I want to say like sativas had wider flowers that weren't as long, and indicas were like I think indica's like the typical now weed flower, like the long, skinny.
Yeah. Phenotypically, they're different, sure. Yeah, they're definitely, and I think I won't say that that's the extent of their difference, but phenotypically you can kind of, a true indica is different from a true sativa. But like you mentioned, a lot of strains have been crossbred, and there's a lot of hybridization just because people want to get, a higher THC potency but with the same look, or for a while their very purple flower was very trendy, and so there was a crossbreeding of so right now there are very few strains that you can say are completely indica and very few that are completely sativa, but there is a wide range of middle, and even then there's like very minimals like of the true hybrid where you could say they're equal blends of each. There's some like dominance of like sativa and indica, and it really is like phenotypically expressed, yeah. But there are some terpenes, that people think are mostly associated, like a true Jack strain is what people most identify with, like an indica strain, and that has a lot of terpenoline. I'm probably saying that very wrong, but that terpene is like very piney, and so people associate that with the indica. So if any strain, even if it's a hybrid, it has high notes of that, then people associate it with like a more indica dominant.
Gotcha.
Whether it is or not, you can't really, don't really know.
So you call it like cannabinoids, right? Like there's people have discovered that some definitely have a mellow effect. Like what are some of those cannabinoids that have been discovered?
CBD has less of a psychoactive effect. So it's more of a body kind of high, if you will. It's a body effect. So you're not going to get, I wouldn't say, I don't know. I'm not also a consumer of cannabis, so I can't really speak to like the effects personally. But what I hear is that, something with a lot of high potency delta 9 THC is going to be able to do some more like psychoactive effects. You're going to have a head high. You're going to feel like that, like typical like laughy situation, or, whatever. Give me some anecdotes. Have you ever smoked cannabis?
And I mean, I think we're talking.
Like
are you asking like psychoactive versus non-psychoactive? Yeah,
like let's say if there's a molecule in the cannabis, and I don't know, I've heard of like delta 9s, delta 8s, like.
Well, delta 9s and delta 8s are THC, and they're just a difference in the composition of the molecule. So it's the same molecule. It's just we're gonna go into like. Into way
Let's do
like
it.
deeper
Let's do it.
level.
It's all there's probably chemical people watching it, so get technical if you want.
Okay.
If you want.
Well, not that deep, because it's just a different orientation of the molecule. So it really our bodies are chiral bodies, right? The way that, and chirality is really just two things that are identical that are not superimposable. So our hands are chiral because we can put them together and they're not super identical, because when you stack them, they're different. Like, right, you can't stack them. You can stack them one way, like when you clap, right? But when you put one on top of the other, they're different, even though they're the same, right? They have orientation and a way that they kind of function, and that's different. Compounds in chemistry are the exact same way. You can have the same compound, and a lot of the times you see it drawn in 2 dimensions, so you think it's identical, but when you do a 3-dimensional analysis, you can see that maybe one bond is sticking out in the back, and that bond in a different compound that has the same structure is sticking out in the front. So it becomes different in the way that it interacts with our body, because our bodies are chiral. One compound can be accepted into one receptor, and that same compound with a different orientation no longer gets accepted into that same receptor. So that's the difference between delta 8, delta 9, and even delta 10, because there's delta 10 THC. And all of those interact with your body differently. Delta 8 is similar, and I say that, like, again, very, like, loosely, similar in effects to CBD, where it's more of a body high. You don't really get a head high, because it will attach to the same receptors that CBD kind of attaches to. And so this is why in the hemp world and, like, the world of, like, conversions and stuff where it's not legal medicinally or recreational, there's, like, a hemp industry where they take CBD and they convert it into an analog of THC, where it still falls in the legal realm of the loophole. So, that's one thing. And then delta 9 has, like, that head high. That's why in legal states and medicinal states, delta 9 potency is more revered. It's something that people look at in terms of determining potency. And then delta 10 is associated with a digested cannabinoid. So there is differences even within the one structure, and then those are all considered THC cannabis or cannabinoids. And then there's different sorts of cannabinoids that have different carbon change. There's things like CBG, CBN, and like THCV. It can go on and on, just varying slightly in the structure of cannabis and having slightly different overall effects. All of those are, I could kind of go and say, like THCV is anecdotally known as like a hunger suppressant / potential cure for diabetes and a nutritional supplement, but there isn't enough research to definitively say that. So all of this is just conjecture.
So if I go to a dispensary and I want to get a product that would help me, let's say, get creative, is there like such formula that exists in products?
Yes and no. I mean, realistically, you're going to go to a dispensary, you're going to ask someone to give you a recommendation, and depending on how good that bud tender is, they'll say, try this. This really helps me, right? It's that anecdotal kind of,
right.
You have to try it, then you have to determine if that's exactly what you wanted to get out of it. And there is some prejudice when someone tells you, hey, try this, it's really, really good, it helped me do this. You're going to instinctually look for those effects. So that kind of helps play into that whole idea. But in terms of something that you can say, like, this will do this, I couldn't really, like, stake my reputation on it. So.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And I mean, get creative, too, is just, like, such an open term that, like, right. I mean, there's studies dedicated how to, I don't know, get creativity flowing in people. And it's so that one, I can imagine would be tough. But, I mean, CBD they're using to help people with, like, seizures and things like that. So, I mean, that one's been federally legal since, like, 2018, 17?
Somewhere,
maybe before.
Earlier than that.
Yeah, like 14 to 16. But,
the hemp world has really benefited from these ideas that it's beneficial for this or that. And I won't lie, though I don't consume cannabis, I have consumed like CBD and stuff like that for anxiety. Not from like a hemp distributor or anything like that. From a dispensary, you can get actual CBD gummies and stuff of that nature. So I have used it, and like anecdotally, like I couldn't even say. I was looking for it to help calm my anxiety, but did it? I don't know. I did stop because I think one time I got a batch that was not homogenized correctly, and I was definitely high off of CBD gummy. So
Wow.
I don't personally like to feel like I can't be not high, and I don't smoke. I've never smoked anything, so it wouldn't be something that I would do, but gummies were something that I tried. But when you consume orally, the effects are a linear kind of effect where you kind of like get to your highest point very, very slowly, but then you also come off of it very, very slowly. So I don't like to feel out of control.
Yeah, some people like panic, some people get sleepy, some people get hungry.
Yeah. I mean, I would be okay if I was just like giggly or whatever, but yeah, my body reacts in the most adverse way. It just goes straight to paranoia, and it's not for me. I don't like to feel like that. I wish I could. I think we've been talking about it now. I've been in the industry for 7 years. I've never smoked anything outside of it, so like cigarettes, nothing like that. But we're approaching that 10-year mark where I might as well try it.
Well, and this is an interesting. Your story makes me think of something, and how the industry was so traditional and almost probably like people in their garages and whatnot doing these things, a very unrepeatable process, and now we're getting to a point where like automation's being involved and machinery, and it's still in its infancy, but I mean, how do you see machines affecting the industry itself? And because that's probably something that not a lot of people are thinking about.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've had this conversation a lot because you guys are automation engineers and we don't have anything automated really in our facilities. I think like anything, like any industry, there's going to be like sectors of like high throughput production where automation is going to be key, and you're going to, encounter a lot of that where throughput is the bottom line. But just with the same notion, there are parts of all industries where the approach is more connoisseur or more artisanal, if you will. I mean, it's kind of like a contradicting idea to think that something that's made in a machine could be artisanal, but most people think by hand is artisanal, but I think there's like a happy medium, right? There's always going to be companies that bottom line production is what they want, and then there's going to be companies like us where we try to incorporate a little bit of certain automation in certain aspects, but not in the production of the actual good. Obviously there are beyond my knowledge base of reasons to go for automation, besides like reproducibility, probes, and kind of gauging where things are at, besides just somebody's intuition, that's always going to be an ideal innovation in any industry, right? But I think for us, we want to find like a fine line between going like a fully automated route and still being able to have people's input play a part in the way that the product is made, because innovation doesn't come from like machines or automated, right? The machine wasn't made, you guys made it, people made it. So as long as there are people involved in the process, innovation can happen, and then you can use tools to further better some kind of product or process. But yeah, definitely, like for me, there's no real separation, because another key component, I think, to the cannabis industry is cannabis culture, and that's why legacy people came in, they brought their expertise, and for a long time, it was all these legacy producers or manufacturers of cannabis that made the best. That either they cultivated the best weed or they, extracted the best weed, and it was all this idea of them just being bunched in like a little group and they're making the best, and everybody else was like mediocre. And it still kind of holds true. Yes, there are other processes that make even the most novice of extractors look like they know what they're doing. But in the end, it kind of stagnates there. It creates like and I hate to use a comparison in like alcohol, but to me that's the best comparison. You go from like, before beer was the industry that it is now, the people who made like Anheuser-Busch, they were innovating. They were ahead of the trade. They were doing the thing and making the best beer. And then when they, automated and whatever their production is, that's more like standardized and mixed batches so that everything tastes the same. Before that happened, they were the innovators, and now they've, decided what region of the industry they wanted to be in, and people like that. But people also like a craft beer, and for a long time, craft beer wasn't really a thing until college students in their garage, did some stuff, or in the bathtub. That's where they used to do all the fermenting. Yeah, right. It's people who think, oh, I can make this either cheaper or better, and then it becomes like its own kind of standalone. So, a happy medium between the two would be ideal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But just hearing your story about like a non-homogenized mixture,
Oh yeah.
like, man, that can be scary and really give a negative perception on the industry that no one wants.
For sure. That's exactly it. Nobody wants to be higher than they want to be. And it's difficult because even with, like, you never hear of like an industry so established as like the beer industry. But have you ever had a beer that's been like, I hear it's called skunked, right? When in transport, it goes from cold to hot to cold. And so that temperature fluctuation messes with the integrity of the alcohol. But there are instances where that happens, right? It's the same in any industry. Like, the taste is the only factor, right? You can't change the potency of like alcohol, or I guess technically you could say it changes the potency. Because if it gets skunked, it might not taste as good, and it might affect the alcohol that's in there. It could degrade it. The same goes for like cannabis. There are instances where you can be as stringent with your SOPs, and you can still create a product that has like hot spots. It's not perfect, and well, science isn't perfect, so I don't know.
True.
Can't really expect that. But it does create opportunity for people to have bad experiences, and that's unfortunate. But yeah, I don't think automation can completely fix that. Yeah.
Talking about like automation and mass producing, I see that, a lot of people are buying the disposable, batteries with cartridge or cartridges themselves. And it's creating like a lot of trash. Like are you familiar, or do you know of any laws regulating that, just to minimize
I think that was one of the things that kept me up at night when we first started. The amount of waste is staggering, and it just continues to build. There are regulations put in place to kind of stop like, kids from accidentally consuming, or, stuff of that. That's more important right now in the regulations than like being able to eliminate waste. And so the problem, I think, ultimately with something like that is that consumers, just like you have a cup of coffee, I have a cup of coffee, we like that ease of like being able to buy something and then consuming it. And then once we're done, like moving on to the next one.
Yep.
It's so much easier to buy a vape cartridge or a disposable that you could quite literally just start using right after you're consuming it within, you drive off and then you get to a location and then you don't move, right? Supposedly, and then or allegedly, and then you can consume it and you're fine. You don't have to have anything like a rig when you talk about dabbable products, or if you're buying flower, you don't have to like roll it in to a joint or whatever, however you smoke it. So it's such a dichotomy to like navigate, because we don't want to create waste, but then it's like that's what the consumers are driving as trends. There aren't any regulations, and most of anything that is kind of like an environmental protection is mostly done by like individual businesses who do like hemp plastics, biodegradable stuff, and things of that nature. But it's also not like feasible economically. Plastics are cheap, and people, it's such a marginal game that you have to, if you don't want to sacrifice the quality of the product, you sacrifice in other things like the plastics that wrap it, that give you that child resistance component, that make you, or that allow you to meet regulations like that. And then, if and when you become a bigger company, and there are some really big brands that I think would benefit from looking into some more environmentally friendly options, it's kind of, as a consumer, I think it's our job to try to push them towards that, because we have our buying power and we can, pick and choose what we do with it. But in terms of like a long-term sustainability, eco-friendly practice, it's driven by each brand and whether or not they see that as economically viable, which is unfortunate. And I think it's not limited to this industry. It's fast fashion is like that,
everything.
like how is that sustainable? I know some businesses have some kind of workarounds, I would say, because it's not a solution. But all in all, it's all these trends that are pushing towards this easy, direct use, consumable product, which we're all guilty of doing.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to get too far off topic, but it's almost an unfortunate outcome of a capitalistic economic system. Yeah. And as long as us as buyers want the cheapest thing, then that's what dictates what the big companies do.
Yeah. We work with a recycling company, hazardous waste, and the owner actually told me that it's very difficult to recycle those.
Yes.
Once they have oil in the oil itself.
Yeah.
So I don't know what happens to the environment when we just let oil I guess, what do you do with the oil?
The oil itself is like, I would liken it to like cooking oil. Yes, it's different, like a different composition, but nobody ever thinks about how to dispose cooking oil, right?
Yeah.
Like, you just think, it's a natural product, right? It comes from a natural thing. But have you ever heard of fatbergs?
No.
Okay, people, and don't do this, but some people, when they're finished cooking, not like frying, but when they're finished cooking and you wash off your pan and it has a little bit of oil,
right?
You flush it down your pipes, and it all collects, it aggregates, right? Because oil and water don't mix.
Right. Yep.
Although water is a universal solvent, but they don't mix well. They'll eventually separate. And have you guys heard of the term like dissolves like?
Yes.
Right? So things of like composition attract to other things of like composition. So if you have, all of your water pooling from drains and there's a little bit of oil in each one, all of the oil will aggregate into like an iceberg of fat.
Gotcha.
And so in plumbing and in major metropolitan cities, it's a huge problem.
It is.
Yeah, you have to like collect it, and then pipes get backed up, and it's a huge problem. The same way as oil, like cannabis oil, would be a problem in trying to recycle like these carts or other disposable type things. It's, if there's residual in there, you have to remove it, and then you can't. I would imagine that in certain electrical components, when you introduce solvents that could remove it, like ethanol, it messes with whatever makes them work. So it's a very hard place.
And so we're talking about the oil, but I think about the batteries too. Like, we're just throwing batteries away. Like, we're supposed to be recycling batteries, like normal batteries, like give them to Home Depot or whatever company collects them.
And who does that? Do you guys do that? No.
I hope the city does. I think the city might.
The city.
Uh,
Yeah. No, I mean, like, personally, like, with your
Yeah.
personal batteries, do you guys turn them into, like, recycling
I
places?
haven't in a while, but we have a big collection of dead ones that we're saving
Mhm.
that hopefully we don't just throw away one
Right?
day. But
Yeah. Well, I imagine that so I guess the difference I think in being sustainable and having that kind of fall on a corporation or a business is that we have a larger collection of batteries or of these like oils, like for us, right? We have a larger collection of these oils, so we're able to do something. But then when we let it out into the world and the consumer gets a hold of it, it's like you have to trust that people are going to follow these guidelines. Hey, do this when you're done. When most people are inclined to chuck it.
so how do we incentivize the buyers to be good? Like, what if a dispensary gave $2 off their next order if they came back with their battery?
Yes, that's something that
That would be
we've
good.
always considered. You'd have to work with a dispensary that is willing to do that, right? When you talk about how marginal the gains are, you're already creating a product as cheaply as you can, and then going into the dispensary and being like, hey, I'm going to sell this to you at $5, let's say, but I need you to, give this incentive. They're going to come back and say, well, then I can't buy it at $5. I need to buy it at $3 when it cost us to produce it maybe like $3.50. It becomes a tight situation. I don't think it's undoable. It's completely feasible. It just, you have to work with people that are like-minded who have the same goals. And if you can find that, I think it's completely reasonable to see that in the future.
Mhm.
It's just, it's the industry is still in its infancy. A lot of people still don't know where they fall in kind of the scheme of a traditional industry.
Mm-hmm.
I want to get into companies hiring now.
Okay.
Because, back in the day, you weren't allowed to, they would drug test you, right? And you would fail. But it sounds like a lot of companies are becoming more lenient on who they hire, right? Like Amazon, I think, doesn't check anymore. I don't know what other big companies. I guess, how do you guys feel about that? There's some jobs that I feel like I don't think you should smoke at work.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely not. Especially if you're working with like heavy machinery
Or driving. Like Amazon, right?
Yes.
Or machines. But yeah, I think that companies seem to be changing their perspective on that, and I think it's interesting. But I guess there's some industries that would be dangerous if you're doing
very much
something like working like that.
Yeah.
But I think it's a good thing that they're letting not be a reason not to get hired.
For sure.
Right?
Yeah.
That's
I think it helps with like reducing the stigma, because a lot of the times, you would get drug tested and it would, say let's pop for cannabis only, and people would think, oh, well, this person's a druggie, and so, this whole idea of like user and versus consumer. I think it's kind of like the same thing with alcohol. People who smoke as a form of
relaxation, maybe.
Relaxation, or what is it like when you do it with
Casually?
Socially.
Socially,
yeah. I can't think of the word. Socially, right? People who drink socially are not immediately considered alcoholics.
Right.
So people who smoke socially should also not be considered like drug addicts.
Yeah.
Right.
Potheads.
Or right? And then all the stigma that's associated with that. And even then, people who do find like some kind of like remedy or medicinal effect of cannabis, they should also not be labeled just potheads, because they're doing it to aid in something that they might not be able to overcome in a sober state. So all these like stigmas are almost removed when you remove the component of testing or drug testing people, or removing that metabolite as a factor to be tested. Of course, there's like hard drugs that, it could be dangerous, and people should be wary of who uses them in their professional settings. But yeah, cannabis and destigmatizing it as well as decriminalizing it, I think will aid into creating a substance similar to alcohol, although alcohol is obviously more detrimental to your health than cannabis, allegedly, right? You know, like, there's just a fine line. I think people should really be able to think of what they're doing. Obviously, make mistakes and maybe go on the deep end and consume every day if that's what they want, and then also be able to like wane off of it if that's also what they choose, and not have it affect all of their life. Obviously, you know, you just can't compare it to like something like heroin, where it becomes like it takes over, you know, your
Right.
personality, everything, where you really can't exist without it. It's not similar to that, not chemically, not in any way. I know some people think, and it's really anecdotal, that it's like the gateway drug. It's a, you know, but it really, like, you'd have to want to or be inclined to do harder drugs, you know, like.
Does anybody in your family have like a stigma like that?
I mean, our only investor and mother was a huge like factor to not do this. It, you know, as soon as my brother brought up cannabis as a potential like investment, it was like a hard no. It took like he convinced me like in 6 months, I would say, and it took like 2 years, maybe 3 years to convince her. But yeah, it was, because I mean, you have to think about it, like, right, Hispanics were targeted heavily in like cannabis, like production, distribution, and any kind of consumption. So it was, you know, it was an immediate red flag. Definitely. Like, no, don't do it. We can't do it. Of all people, we can't do it, you know? Other people, fine. But us, no. And then, honestly, like, older generations, like my grandmother, who's a boomer, are way more open to it. It's just, I don't know if it's, like, that difference in generation, because my mom's a Gen X. And I think Gen X and millennials really got the brunt of, like, that war against drugs and how it's so bad and don't do it and, you know, dare and all those things. We really brunted a lot of that pressure and propaganda not to do it. And then obviously all the people that were incarcerated, minorities, you know, people in socioeconomically underdeveloped regions. Like, it's just, it's hard to picture that as something that can lead to a successful business. But yeah, that, and my mom was probably like the most harshest deterrent.
I think some of my family members don't really visit me because of what I do sometimes. You know?
Really?
I think so. Like, and I realized, like, why do they come? Like, one of them wants to be an engineer, and he knows that I'm working on this, and he wants to come, you know. But I feel like his mom is telling him to, like, be careful.
Because you're gonna lure him into drugs.
He's doing drugs. You know, like, no,
man.
But it does feel like that a little bit.
Yeah.
My parents are now more okay with it. My dad is okay with it. But I think my dad's wife is not.
Oh.
Like,
she's also
she's
against.
very, like, against. Yeah, when we were talking about it, they were like, nah, like, why do this? You know, like.
Yeah.
It's like she thinks it's bad.
No, it really has. I think before I agreed to kind of joining the industry and becoming a part of it and doing what we do, I really had a deep kind of reflective moment because I knew that as soon as I was associated with it, it would be like, oh, that person's just a pothead or a this or that, even though I don't consume, like, you know, nobody could guess. And at some point I stopped saying it, you know, because it's just an assumption, you know, like, oh, this person does this because she likes it. Not that I don't like it. I'm impartial either way. I haven't found a way to dose myself that I could feel comfortable with it. And that's a problem that I'd like to approach as well, like later on, you know. But that stigma or the kind of notion that you were this or that, and something that you would never be able to, like, kind of eliminate from the person that you are. It was a huge decision, right? You can't like, because once people know, they can't unknow. Like,
Mm-hmm.
though,
Right.
you know, your eventually maybe your stepmother will come to terms with the idea that that's what you do. She may never really like let it go internally. Like, it would always be this feeling that she had.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, it was a huge reflective, like, am I really gonna do this? Like, am I gonna take my chemistry career this route? Because
Right.
I wanted to do some wild things and, you know, cure diabetes and all these other things. And now when I think about it, like, are people gonna look at me and be like, oh, that person, she was just like a pothead, like, what does she know? So yeah, that idea is it's very daunting. But I think when people, like professionals like you and I and you, all of us, the people that are associated with you, you know, companies of legitimacy, of, you know, stake in other main industries, you know, come into the cannabis space, not just for monetary reasons. They also help in like destigmatizing cannabis as a whole. And so, you know, slowly, I mean, even 7 years ago compared to today, the difference in how people see what we do is so great. Yeah. So before, I mean, it was like a point of contention with my mom because, you know, she's a Hispanic lady who speaks Spanish. And so when she would say weed, she wouldn't say weed, which was already like, come on, say cannabis. She would say marijuana. And I was just like, Mom, it's not that. I mean, it is that, but it's not that, because it has that like negative connotation, the war on drugs. That's what they said, marijuana. And like, and then when you say it with like a Mexican accent, it's like even worse. You know what I mean? So yeah, so when people stop saying like marijuana, and even like weed's still a little more acceptable, but saying cannabis, having professionals and all other industries come into the space, it helps. We're not there yet, and maybe we won't even be there in our lifetime, but, you know, moving forward in future generations, we'll probably not see the same amount of stigma that we did. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I hear too that right now the cannabis industry is like anti-pharma. I don't want to say pharma, but like big companies that can come and take over. Like, I think it's my understanding that I think here in California they were giving it to small businesses. Is that accurate? Like versus giving it to like a
I don't think
huge
big
pharma
pharma
company?
had a lot of interest into coming into like in the infancy. I don't think that's like their MO. I think a lot of the times big pharma comes into certain industries that are already established with established regulations that they can just come in and buy out and then do what you guys do, automate, mass produce, throughput, investor, like shareholder, blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? Like where that becomes like the soul of what works a company. I think that's what they look for. So at its infancy, cannabis, we don't even have a process to like say effectively. I won't say we. There are only a handful of companies that can effectively reproduce a Delta 9 cannabinoid synthetically. So through synthetic processes without extraction. So I think that's when big pharma comes in. That's what you'll see from big pharma is like isolated cannabinoids. Nothing like cannabis culture. They're never going to make concentrates. They're going to take it into the real medicinal clinical trials, all of that. But in terms of like whether or not they had any interest or whether or not jurisdictions allowed for it, I would say that I don't think it was even like a thought, like a blip, like, you know, it wasn't even on their radar. But you do see corporations that are MSOs, multi-state operators, you know, kind of taking over certain regions. And California is a very difficult market for MSOs to succeed. That's because cannabis culture is so strong in California that anything corporatized that takes away from it, a lot of consumers, they use their buying power to eliminate. Like, I don't know if you guys know, I think Curaleaf, which is, you know, one of the big multi-state operators, they ceased the operations in California. They just couldn't do it. So that's just one example, and that's like one that's just recent and popped into my head. But there are many examples of MSOs that cease their operations here because it's just not it's not in our culture in California to do that. And I think it across all industries, right? Like we are more of a not so much in SoCal, but like the Central Coast up north, it's more like individuals and community. SoCal is a little bit kind of, like the LA area. It's a little more corporatized in a way, but we do have a strong foundation of at least supporting like community. Mm-hmm. And then in cannabis, I think it's quite prevalent.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I know in New York State, we're primarily talking about California, but I do know in New York State, the first round of license releases were you're only allowed to apply if you were formally convicted of a crime in the industry.
Equity.
Yeah, that's what I hear.
So that's one way. I think that states are trying to at least right a wrong.
Social equity, though, is a bit of a double-edged sword, in my opinion. It's not. There aren't any real regulations that protect the individual that is trying to benefit from this social equity program, because we had some social equity programs like in the LA area, Long Beach and so forth, where they made it easier for somebody that had a social equity applicant kind of go through the licensing phase, but a social equity applicant doesn't have the funds to make a company. So who backs them?
Right. Interesting.
Right? The people who back them say, look, regulations say I have to do X, Y, and Z, right? A 50-50 split minimum, because the social equity, I believe, has to be a 50% stakeholder. So I'm going to do this. I'll fund it. We'll go through licensing and everything's going to be great, right? What happens is this silent partner, let's say, lets this social equity applicant kind of take the reins. And then, not to disparage, but a social equity applicant, like you say, probably has been incarcerated, was in the illicit market, doesn't know anything about how to report things, with taxes and through state compensation for employees and all of the things that make a business. And they don't have the tools. And sometimes they don't even have the tools academically. It's just someone who has industry with the culture, the plant, the this, the that, right? It doesn't make a business person. Mm-hmm. And these investors who fund all of this, they know that. And so though they license it and they let this person, right, they have an idea of a runway that they're going to allow someone to do. Mm-hmm. And so when the social equity applicants say doesn't become profitable, and the social equity applicant realizes they're not going to become profitable, the investor may say, hey, this isn't working out. How about I buy you out and I'll take over and try to recoup some of my losses. And as someone who all they needed was their name to get an application, you see a payout and you're kind of let's take it.
Right.
Let me cut my losses and get out of here. And so maybe let's just say a $50,000 buyout to buy, it becomes that kind of thing. So though social equity is a great approach and it does need some refinement, I don't know how it's a feasible all the way through. It's just you're assuming that we're all good, that everyone's a good actor and everybody doesn't want to screw someone over, and that's not how our society is built, unfortunately.
Interesting.
Yeah, but social equity was a very noble idea. Yeah, if it's done properly, I think it could still. But then we'll go into a fully decriminalized national industry. States that don't have the markets aren't gonna allow for that. They're gonna want big names to come in and make some profit and do some tax revenue for the cities and stuff off of that.
Yeah.
So it's tricky. I mean, in its infancy, it would have been, had it been regulated properly or had certain regulations been in place to protect people like that, it may have been a more successful program, I think. Just conjecture.
Yeah.
Who knows?
And hopefully states that are in their infancy and early stages maybe learn from the states who went through it before. Actually, knowing government, probably not, but...
Yeah, they don't talk to each other. Isn't
right.
that crazy?
Yeah. I mean, all the laws are different.
All of them.
So...
Yeah, it's a bit sad, but...
So, Glinda, what kind of... I want to get into your business now.
Okay.
So what kind of customers are you looking for? Like, what are your ideal customers? Like, who should be reaching out to you?
What's our demographic?
Yeah, your demographic. Like, what kind of services would you be providing for them?
Honestly, we are a business-to-business type of company. So all of our all of our customers are brands, dispensaries who want to make their own brands. Brands.
Brands?
Essentially, yeah. So people who need manufacturing, there's a lot of, maybe also cultivators who, have an offshoot of product or, some biomass that want to salvage and, stuff like that. That's really where Cannavision does what it does. But in terms of everything else that we do as a company, we also have brands, and then for us, through our distribution license, can then go into dispensaries. And then for us, the consumer at a dispensary is somebody who wants to use their, political capital, let's say, right, to be able to buy from people like us and keep the industry diverse. And it's difficult as a hermit crab that's completely introverted to want to be, put ourselves out there. But I think I do that all the time, and I find that a lot of people, like-minded people, do that, right? You go, you try not to shop at chains, and you try to, reinvest in the community, support the community, see a small shop, a local entrepreneur, and help them and support them through your capital or your buying power. So ideally, an end consumer is someone like that for us. Whether or not it gets to that, we'll see. We have to just put ourselves more out there more, and that can be daunting. It's not easy to be a public figure, though you do it so well, so I don't know.
Kind of. I'm just, I like teaching people, so that's why I do this. And I mean, the cannabis is one of those things that people should know about and try to reduce the stigma on it. So that's why we're doing it. Obviously, we're partnering as well with, we're bringing our machinery and helping each other out, I feel like we're like-minded people. So yeah, I mean, whatever I can do to help you, help us. And then, hopefully we can get some brands to maybe reach out to us through this episode and, help them grow. If you guys are located in California, any co-packing services like filling cap and cartridges.
Yes, with
boxing
the
them.
Amazing
Machines
from Loomis Automation. Yeah, definitely. I mean, ultimately, the industry is made up of a variety of people, and at the core of everything for us, it's people. Who you work with, how easy it is to work with these people, whether or not you can trust them, and that's fundamental to the things that we do. We're so small that we could easily have been eliminated. Why are we still around? Obviously, people, tend to like to work with us. I feel like we're pretty easy to do things. We're Mexican, so we're fast. we
like to work.
Right? What is that line that Drake said? That money taught him Spanish. Make it, ándale. Ándale, right? So, yeah, I think that, and then being inclusive in the industry, inclusivity as a whole for minorities, women, and stuff like that. It's the crutch of what we started. for me, obviously, besides like being like a family oriented company, my first outings in the industry, I realized like, there's not a lot of people that look like me. So it's a huge responsibility to do that. But also when people see that, it's, it's inviting.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, whoever, as long as, you have a cool product and you want good product or good concentrate to go in your product, like we could fill even other people's products, right, with all the automated machinery. But yeah, there's a lot of ways we are to a lot of people a gateway into the industry, because all our costs are not so high. We're not completely bloated. We have one investor. I hope she's happy. I don't know, but we're not bloated. Our CEO does not make like what other CEOs make. So there's that. That is me. So, we keep it all for the company. We reinvest everything into the company. We find good people to work with, and really strive to create a service and product that exemplifies what we stand for. Yeah.
Gotcha. So what are your long-term goals for your company?
Well, honestly, on most days, just to survive the day. I think as most people do, right? Like, there are a lot of negative and hard things to deal with, a lot of dark days, but ultimately, I mean, it's like that everywhere. So why not do it for yourself, right? But we want, Cannavision to, like I said, exemplify the things that we stand for, be diverse, employ a lot of people from like the neighborhoods that we grew up in. That's very crucial to us. We grew up in Santa Ana. Being able to have a Santa Ana facility was kind of dumb luck, because we probably couldn't afford it, and a lot of things they lined up awfully perfect because we went through a lot of negative and darker days to get to where we are at. But being able to have that facility there, opening it up to Santa Ana locals to come in and work, showing people of our own socioeconomic background that there is a way out, even though social mobility is difficult in the U.S. That it's just it's a foundation to what we do to how we do things, and ultimately having it be a cornerstone, at least in our community, for sure is one of the goals, the long-term goals. And I mean, expanding, who doesn't want to have those like dreams of like expansion and becoming like a multi-million-dollar company or a multi-billion-dollar company? The truth is, with the fundamental ideas that we have, that might not be like in store, like being like a stizzy, like we're more for the people than we could be for like profits. So honestly, just creating that sort of company and creating good products, being able to withstand these ups and downs, and being a recognizable manufacturing company in that sense, I think is long term. And then obviously the creation of certain brands through like our partnership, creating a brand that people can identify, right? Because Cannavision as a manufacturer, you'll see our names on like the manufacturing sticker. It says Cannavision, and the first time I saw that on a product that was not my own, it made my day. There are products out there that were manufactured by us that weren't technically like made into an individual package, so nobody knows that we made them, but I know, and so it gives me joy. But being able to create then a brand that exemplifies Cannavision without having like that manufacturing background, it just being like a brand for people to be able to identify, that's also like I wouldn't say a pipe dream, because I hope that people, like I said, spend their purchasing power on stuff that they believe in, or at least that they can identify with. So yeah, branding and then being able to withstand, because ultimately manufacturing is, I think, with one or two of the big guys in California, they can feed the industry like 3 times over, you know? Like, it's with automation and throughput being the bottom line, like, you don't need hundreds of manufacturers. But being able to find a little corner in the market and calling it a home, I think is good enough for me. Maybe not for everybody, but yeah, that.
Nice. Yeah, I think those are awesome goals. And I mean, talking about the community in Santa Ana, you two went to the same high school, didn't
We
you?
did.
Oh yeah,
Look at that. Representing
Yeah.
what high school?
Santa Ana Valley
Santa
Valley
Ana.
High School.
There we go.
Yes.
Look at that.
Yep.
One of the poorest and I think bottom 3 of the nation.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
one of the highest Hispanic
rates.
population
Yeah.
density population
Yes.
in the whole country. I think is the highest density of Hispanics
In Santa Ana, yes.
Santa Ana,
Well, maybe LA.
LA too, right? It could be.
Either way, a very trying area to grow up in.
Right. Yeah, back in the day, I remember the Dare days and where I used to live. There was like gangs, and I remember gangbangers gangbangers everywhere. Scary looking guys. I'm like, I'm definitely not messing with those people.
Yeah.
And I've seen just how the cops have cleaned up the streets. Like, it's insane how different it is now. But yeah, Santa Ana's I'm glad you ended up in Santa Ana because you are representing. I think that's a good thing. Imagine you being out in the desert. It would have been a different feel. But yeah, you're home, and it's our home.
You know, I mean, like, it was kind of self-induced, this representation, but I really hope to be able to show some light. You know, Santa Ana has its own way of bringing community and culture and a lot of advocacy, and, you know, people even from our classes at Valley who have gone out to do very interesting things, very great things. And so, you know, like I said, even though I kind of put myself in the way, I'd like to think that any representation is good in Santa Ana, at least, because Santa Ana was one of the first cities to like allow cannabis manufacturing dispensaries and all of that, and to not have like a Santa Ana local be able to own any part of that industry in Santa Ana, it would be such a shame.
Right.
Though there are other, I believe there's one other local Santa Ana resident that owns a dispensary. So if anybody wants to shop there, they can do some research. Or we could shout them out. I don't know.
You can shout them out.
It's Evergreen. Off of Grand. Although, if you really want to spend and buy some Cannavision products, we're at Tropicana.
Yeah, talk about your products. Which one is?
So we have a brand together that we're launching. It's still in the works, but you know, she's gonna be a beaut. But currently, Cannavision has launched a brand called Halvesies. And Halvesies is a dabbable product, so it comes in a 1 gram dram, and it has 2 compartments in the container. And it's called Halvesies, so it's half and half of something, right? Right now we have 2 SKUs that have 0.5 gram of live rosin and 0.5 gram of live resin that people mix together. It's also an introduction for some people who only smoke rosin to try some like live resin that's good, and vice versa, because rosin is a higher price point to people, so it can also be an introduction to like the rosin of the space. And to me it was the brainchild of my brother and partner to kind of be able to give people choice, to be able to buy something and not be stuck with 1 gram, because I know 1 gram sounds like very little, but it's a lot to smoke, you know. And then so say you only have, you know, our products retail for $30. Say you only have, after taxes, $45 to spend at a dispensary, and you buy 1 product, and it just wasn't like your favorite thing that you bought, like you're stuck with it, you can't return it. But with our concept, you can get 2 products for 1. So you can get a resin or a rosin, and in our next SKUs that we launch, it'll be 2 different strains, so you can have 2 different types of effects or 2 different feelings maybe, not necessarily effects, but taste wise it'll be different. And and that was kind of the premise of what we launched with Halvesies. And then in the works we have a vape line called Santa Mala that we are working on and bringing to market hopefully very soon in October. And that's also just a live resin decarbed disposable that's ready for use. It's probably one of the easiest products to bring to market from our standpoint, because it's almost the easiest extension of what Cannavision does as a volatile type manufacturer. So we make this concentrate, and it comes out, we separate it so that we can decarb like the THC, then we reintroduce the high terpene extract, which is the flavor component, and we put it in a product. No additives, no, botanical terps, which some people really frown on, but everybody has their own. There's nothing wrong with a botanical terp, but that's just not what we do. We want to have a full representation of the plant in a vapable product that's easily consumed, so that somebody who, doesn't want to buy all the accessories can just easily have access to good product that's clean and nice to consume. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Any questions from Brett on that side?
So I guess we talked about a lot over the past, hour and a half or so.
Okay.
Just let's kind of sum it up. I mean, we talked about a lot of issues in the industry right now. So I guess what are one or two things that you'd say?
Takeaways?
Yeah, like the industry needs. Like what are improvements that the industry could have? And I don't know, what are some potential solutions maybe? Like let's just talk crazy solutions that don't necessarily need to be realistic, but let's just throw them out there.
Right. I think education is huge. Being able to really explain something to someone in a level that they understand. It's difficult sometimes, as for me as a chemist, to talk to someone without the expectation that they know what I'm talking about when I say like chiral or this or certain compounds, delta 8, delta 9, and it's difficult, right, to get down to that level. But I think that having that as a forethought and trying to bring more people into the space that may be like hesitant is crucial to continuing to destigmatize. And then also dosing is a huge, I think, impediment for people that are coming into the industry, as whether it's fear or bad experiences or what they've heard. It all kind of ties together. Education with the actual dosing. Having those two solutions kind of marry and homogenize together would be phenomenal. I've seen some like dosing implementations throughout the years that have kind of come and gone. The best and easiest dosing that can be done is orally, but like I said, it has a different effect. So some people also don't want that like steady high, and some people want to be able to like come off of it. So finding dosing in a vapable or smokable product would be kind of nice. Where we are in that, I would probably say another 5 to 10 years to develop, and for it to be commercially available. Maybe like 5 years to develop and 10 years to be commercially available. But I think it's not like impossible. And then with education too, we're getting there. It's just people like you guys who record videos and talk. Just talk to people who have a better idea, right? Not just opinions, like actual knowledge of what's going on. It's key to getting the industry where it needs to go. Yeah. But other than that, there's nothing wrong with, it's like anything. It's a roller coaster, but life is dynamic, and if it were stagnant, it would be boring and maybe like an abyss of darkness. And who wants that?
Yeah. I agree. Well, awesome.
Yeah. Thank you guys for having me on.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for sharing your knowledge and experiences, and hopefully we can do it again. I mean, you're
Yeah.
close by. We're gonna keep working. Maybe we'll do one for Santa Mala brand,
Definitely.
the launch,
Yes.
quick one, and
Where you guys consume the product and can give it a rating and
Yeah.
see what it's
Ooh,
like.
we'll review
Yeah.
it. We'll
Okay.
review
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. And we'll bring our COO and co-founder on for that.
Okay.
So
Okay.
he can try it too. Stand by the product, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
We do. I can't be paranoid, you know? Or more paranoid, right? Everyone's a little paranoid. So
Right.
Well, anyways, yeah. I mean, I think you're a great advocate and a great speaker for the industry. So thank you for that. And
thank you.
representing it well and giving it a good name, and hope to see you more and
Yeah.
with a bigger voice
For sure.
as time goes on.
Thank you.
Let's do this. All right. Well, thank you all for listening to this episode. Until next time.